Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sharon Squire, and I'm a member of the Ottawa branch of the National Association of Federal Retirees. I'm delighted to welcome you today to our webinar entitled Healthy Sleep for Healthy Aging with Dr. Rebecca Robillard. Bienvenue, Dr. Robillard. Nous sommes très heureux de vous avoir parmi nous. I would like to begin by recognizing that NAFAR and most of us are located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We extend our respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples for their valuable past, present, and future contributions to this land in our country. It's also my pleasure to welcome you, our members, today. And I understand we have over 300 registrants for the session today. Sleep is an important topic. You can help our association grow by participating in our annual mega recruitment drive. Every time you successfully recruit a new member, you will be entered into a draw to win prizes, including 2 grand prizes of a $10,000 travel voucher and a $5,000 cash each, courtesy of Colette and Bel Air Direct. And we'll give you all the details on this on our follow-up emails. As well, welcome anyone who is not a member of our association. We hope these webinars will inspire you to join us. So before we begin, just a few process details. So the flow will be Dr. Robillard will make her presentation, which will be followed by a Q&A session. Please ask and add your questions as you think of them during her presentation by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to open the Q&A window. Type your question into the Q&A window and then click on Send to submit your question. Tapez votre question dans la fenêtre QR, puis cliquez sur Envoyer pour soumettre votre question. At the end of the presentation, I will pose the questions that you've asked to Dr. Robillard. Veuillez noter que ce webinaire sera présenté en anglais, mais la participation bilingue est toujours encouragée. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Rebecca Robillard. Dr. Robillard is a scientist, clinical neuropsychologist, and tenured associate professor at the University of Ottawa School of Psychology. She leads the clinical sleep research at the Royal, an institutional world-class strength. Rebecca is also the co-lead of the National Sleep Research Consortium and regularly shares this knowledge with the public, policymakers, and the private sector. Dr. Robillard will help us to learn more about sleep and how it's connected to and foundational for various aspects of our mental, physical, and cognitive health, as well as how sleep changes with age. And don't we know that? She will have some tips as well for us to help facilitate our healthy sleep. In my role as the chair of the Board of Trustees at the Royal, I have had the pleasure of seeing Dr. Robillard's work and its groundbreaking research that translates into better care. So now, without more further ado, please welcome Dr. Robillard.
Bon matin. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Sharon, for this too kind introduction. So it's my pleasure to meet with you today to talk about healthy sleep and how it grows as we are aging. And I think this is an important topic because unfortunately, sleep often gets neglected in our busy lives. Many people are trying to live healthier lifestyles. They carefully watch what they eat. They exercise regularly, but we tend to take poor care of our sleep. And there's this idea that sleep is an unproductive state, while in fact, sleep is really critical for optimal health, both from a mental health and a physical health perspective. So we'll talk today about how sleep works and what typical sleep looks like. We'll talk about what to expect for age-related changes in sleep, both for like normal age-related changes and the sleep disorders side of things. And we'll also talk about sleep and physical and mental health and ways of improving our sleep. So I hope that by the end of this session, I'll be able to convince you that sleep is important for your well-being and your health, and also give you some tips to help improve your sleep if you're struggling with sleep. So first thing is that there's major individual differences in our sleep needs. Unfortunately, there's this kind of myth that everyone should be getting 8 hours of sleep, while in fact, sleep needs are mostly determined by genetic factors. And indeed, a large proportion of the population does prefer to sleep for about 7 to 9 hours of sleep in average, but there's a smaller group of people who need only 4 to 6 hours of sleep, for example. And these short sleepers do not have insomnia. They function very well with little sleep, and this will not necessarily affect their health. This is very important to keep in mind because oftentimes in sleep clinics, we see people who are convinced that they have sleep insomnia or sleep problems because they sleep only 6 hours, while, they're looking at their partner is sleeping 8 hours or 9 hours. And, making those comparisons sometimes can be a little bit dangerous, especially as we're hearing more and more that, everyone needs to get at least 8 hours of sleep. So I want to moderate that belief a little bit because it kind of leads people sometimes to get more stressed and anxious about their sleep, thinking that, it might be dangerous. And that in itself, like that stress and that anxiety about sleep can, in the long term, create some sleep problems as well. So we need to be vigilant about that and really listen to our body, listen to what, the amount of sleep that we need without looking on the side and seeing what our partner is getting in terms of sleep. So beyond sleep quantity, I also want to stress out that what matters is the quality of our sleep as well. So during a typical night, we go through different sleep stages, and we'll go through them, and I'll explain step by step. So in stage 1 of sleep, this is where we're falling asleep. So this is often described as a transitional state. Oftentimes we'll have some imagery in our head. We might be thinking about different things, and oftentimes we actually don't realize that we're falling asleep, we're drifting into sleep. We might have what we call hypnagogic jerks, kind of a fancy word to talk about sleep twitches. So you might have noticed that, like your limbs are kind of doing those jerky movements. So this is totally normal, just a sign that we're drifting into sleep. And then there's stage 2 sleep, which is still light sleep. This is, that's one of the things that I want to stress out, and that hopefully you'll kind of incorporate in your knowledge by the end of the session, is that all these sleep stages are important for different functions of the body, brain, and mind. So even if we're talking about light sleep, for example, we know that certain elements of it are really important for learning, for memory, and we'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. Then there's stage 3 sleep, which we also often refer to as deep sleep, which is very important for a lot of recuperating functions in the body. It's prime time for the secretion of growth hormone. It's really important for the immune system, and also for learning and memory and different aspects of learning and memory. And then there's the other stage of sleep, which is paradoxical sleep, or you might have heard of REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. So this is a kind of paradoxical state because, as we'll see, we have a very busy brain. So brain activity that is very similar to what we see during the wake state. But our body is completely paralyzed, so we don't move. And this is a stage of sleep in which we have classically those vivid kind of mental activities that we classically recognize as dreams. So those dreams with a kind of a clear narrative, trend with characters and things happening, and you recognize in which environment you are. So these kind of elaborate dreams tend to happen in paradoxical sleep more often than not. And surprise, surprise, this is also very important for learning and memory. So how can we track these sleep stages? Like what do they actually correspond to physically? One of the other thing I wanted to highlight here is as well that it's not, that we go through stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 sleep, REM sleep, and then we wake up. We go through cycles. So we will go through what we call non-REM sleep. So stage 1, 2, and 3, alternating with REM sleep, periods of REM sleep, every 90 minutes or so during the night. So we'll go through different cycles during the night. And overall, we'll spend about 3/4 or 75% of the night in light sleep and deep sleep. So from stage 1 to stage 3. and then 25% of the night in paradoxical sleep. And so I was hinting towards how we measure sleep. This is examples of the apparatus that we classically use for sleep test or polysomnography. So polysomnography is that fancy word to say that we're effectively measuring multiple types of biological signals while the person is sleeping. So if you notice on these images, we put different sensors on the head of the person to measure brain activity, but also close to the eyes and close to the chin as well, to be able to measure eye movements and muscle tone, which will be very important to distinguish the different sleep stages, as we'll see in a minute. So what does this actually look like when we look at that in the sleep lab? Here you can see recordings from these sensors. The three top lines here are the brain sensors. So this shows our brain activity. And you can see that the activity is fairly rapid. Like we've got lots of waves and they're fairly small, but fairly rapid. And then there's periods where the waves tend to space out a little bit. They become a little bit slower and of a bigger amplitude as well. So this is what we call alpha activity. This is a micro state, if you want, where we're getting a sense that the person is getting more and more relaxed. And we're seeing that especially more prominent in people, for example, who do often meditate, and they are really good at getting their brains in a relaxed state. And so that's our first three lines at the top. The two lines here are showing the eye movements, and you can see those kind of bubble shapes. And this is something very classical that we're seeing as people are getting in that relaxed state and starting to fall asleep. And even we're measuring that here with electrodes, with these kind of sensors in the lab. But if you want to do a test tonight, if you've got a bed partner, you can also kind of look at them. We often see those movements actually underneath the eyelids. So kind of this small rolling movement from side to side. So this is a sign that, you know, your partner might be getting into light sleep. And here we've got the muscle tone as our last signal at the bottom. So this is a classical kind of sign of very relaxed wakefulness. And what happens when we're falling asleep, the brain waves start spacing out a little bit. And here we're hitting stage 2 sleep. And this is an example of how we see the recording in the sleep lab. So you can see that our brain activity patterns change pretty drastically. But this is far from a fat line, right? The brain is still active. It's just taking a different shape, different forms. And specifically in stage 2 sleep, aside from the waves being like more spaced out and of bigger amplitude, we see as well specific phenomenon happening. I don't know if you notice these little kind of bursts of more rapid activity in the background of slower activity. This is what we call sleep spindles, and we'll talk about those a little bit later as well, but these are characteristic signs of stage 2 sleep, and as we'll see, super important for memory processes and different aspects of cognition. So this was an example of stage 2 sleep, so light sleep. This is an example of deep sleep. So you see that then we're reaching with even slower waves, so more spaced out and with higher amplitude as well. So again, like very far from like a flat line and nothing's happening. It's really, I find this fascinating because it shows that the basically the brain is functioning on a different modality, different type of activity. And here is a classical recording of what we see during REM sleep, or rapid eye movement sleep. So you can see that the brain activity compared to what we were seeing before with the big waves are now getting much more smaller, much more rapid, a bit more similar to what we were seeing during wakefulness. And we can see here, if we look at the eyes, some rapid movements occurring as well. And we've got our muscle tone with the chin here that is completely flat. So that's an example of what we were referring to earlier, where the brain is very active. The brain is actually currently dreaming. It's imagining that we're seeing stuff, that we're hearing stuff, that we're moving around. but our body is completely paralyzed. If we look at the muscle tone, it's kind of a flat line. So basically, our brain is kind of clever that way, that it processes things, but it cuts the information from reaching our muscles and our limbs so that we don't act our dreams. And we go through these sleep stages in alternation several times across the night. The distribution of these sleep stages typically changes as well as the night progresses. So here you have an example of that with the different sleep stages of wakefulness, REM sleep, non-REM one, so stage 1 sleep, stage 2, stage 3. So the lower we go, the deeper we get in terms of sleep. And one of the first things that you could realize here is that first, it's not like we go in through the different sleep stages and then wake up for a final awakening. We do have bouts of wake as well during the sleep episode, and this is perfectly normal. And this example is probably a kind of an understatement. Like we often, wake up multiple times during the night and don't necessarily realize it the next morning, or we might. But just again, like it's important to keep in mind that those wake ups are normal during the night. Another thing that you might realize as well is that there's much more deeper sleep in the first portion of the night, and actually more REM sleep in the later portion of the night. So this is why, if we wake up, for example, more earlier in the night course, like it might be very difficult to kind of get out of bed if we need to go to the bathroom, for example, because we're emerging from that deep sleep, and it's not necessarily that we haven't slept well and we're super tired. It means that our brain is kind of emerging from that deeper stage where it's difficult to kind of reconnect with the real world. And this is also why, like, if we wake up, in the morning, we have higher chances of remembering our dreams because we're closer to the REM sleep periods where we are having those elaborate, vivid dreams as well compared to earlier during the night. So kind of interesting to see that sleep is really this kind of dynamic phenomenon that also changes across the night and across time. And what actually regulates our sleep? So I want to kind of tap on some of the mechanisms of sleep regulation, because I feel like it's helpful to understand what determines like why we're, starting to feel sleepy at a certain time and why we're able to sleep for a certain chunk of time without having like micro naps all across the day, for example. So there's two main processes that are involved in sleep regulation. First one we call homeostatic sleep process, which is essentially our sleep drive. So this is a process via which we accumulate sleep pressure progressively with the time that we spend awake. So this is what you see here in this little cartoon. So the more time we're spending awake, the more we build up that sleep pressure. And this is not, if you notice, there's a little curve in the line. That means that, the more, this is more aggressive at the start of the day, and then we kind of hit a bit of a plateau towards the evening. And then when we sleep, we dissipate that sleep pressure. And again, not in the linear way. So we dissipate that sleep pressure much more aggressively in the first portion of the night compared to the later portion of the night. And this is kind of just a cartoon at the theoretical level, if you want, but we've got markers in our brain activity patterns that we can use to track this very efficiently. As I was saying, like the amount of deep sleep that we're getting is much more pronounced in the early phases of the sleep episode. And what you have here is slow wave activity. So that's kind of a marker of how big those waves are and how many of those we've got, so how deep my deep sleep is. And we can see that we follow during the sleep period the same type of curve that we're seeing here, with a lot of slow wave activity, a lot of that kind of deep sleep in the earlier portion of the night, and then whoops, we drop fairly rapidly and kind of hit a plateau during the later portion of the night. And interestingly, what we see is that if we sleep deprive people, and I feel guilty of that, like through my studies, sleep depriving people to understand some of these mechanisms, what we see is that there's a drastic increase in the amount of deep sleep after when the person actually is able to sleep after the sleep deprivation. So what that means is that basically the brain will kind of be clever in that way that it'll get the deepest stages of sleep first. And if we kind of increase the sleep pressure, it'll get more of that deep sleep to recuperate more effectively. So that's something that's also comforting to keep in mind. If we're having issues sleeping or our nights are being kind of a bit curtailed and we're kind of waking up too early in the morning, rest assured that you still get some of that deep sleep in the earlier phases of the night. And so that kind of sleep pressure system is one of the two mechanisms via which we regulate our sleep. The other one that's also very important is what we call the circadian process. So that refers to our biological clock that is within our brain and that generates circadian rhythms. So rhythms and our biological signals that revolves on a 24-hour period. And so we have basically a stronger wake signal around 6 to 5 p.m. So in the kind of late evening, late afternoon and early evening, and a weaker wake signal at about 4 to 6 a.m. And interestingly, we can model that if we look at the biology using our core body temperature. So if I was to track your temperature over 24-hour period, I would see it increase during the daytime and decrease during the sleep time. And so we know that this decrease in body temperature is also very important for us to kind of fall asleep and stay asleep as well. So we've got these kind of rhythmic kind of pattern. And here you can see an example in body temperature, but I could show you a whole list of different hormones, our brain activity as well, our thinking skills, like our behaviors, of course, but a lot of, the way that we regulate insulin, like a lot of our physiological functions are regulated by that biological clock, so that during the daytime, our body is tuned to work optimally to kind of, eat and expend energy and think and do all the things that we need to do in the daytime. And in the nighttime, we're set up to, slow down our metabolism and start recuperating efficiently to give our body a break. And so it's really the interaction between these two processes, between the sleep pressure processes and between the biological clock, that enables us to fall asleep in the evening and wake up in the nighttime. So what happens in the daytime, we build up our sleep pressure progressively, but we're able to stay awake because this sleep pressure is compensated by increased wake signal. If we look at the biological clock signal, so in the afternoon and in the evening, we're able to kind of stay awake even if we have that super high level of sleep pressure. And then in the evening, there's some point where our wake signal starts dropping down, and then our sleep pressure is very high. So it's kind of that turning point where it becomes really difficult to kind of stay awake. And then we start falling asleep. And during the nighttime, as we've seen, like we'll dissipate that sleep pressure with that deep sleep that our brain will produce. And at the same time, we'll have our wake signal that will continue to go down, so that even towards the later portion of the night, even if we start dissipating most of the sleep pressure, our biological clock is still kind of sending a very low wake signal. So we're able to stay asleep and gain from these other types of sleep stages that we've been talking about, like REM sleep, for example. And then we reach a point in the morning where our wake signal starts going up again, and we've dissipated all of the sleep pressure that we accumulated. So then it's time to wake up. So it's really the interplay between, the amount of wakefulness that we get and pressure in terms of our sleep system that it creates, and the natural rhythms of our biological clock that makes it so that we're able to fall asleep in the evening, wake up in the morning without having kind of too broken sleep. And as I was hinting before, like sleep is very important for various aspects of physical health. We've been talking about hormones that are regulated by the circadian system, but also some of the sleep mechanisms. We know that, for example, growth hormone is preferentially released during deep sleep. So it's involved in growth and development. That's why our little ones are often having those cramps in their legs at night, because this is prime time for the body to grow. But this is also very important across the lifespan. So even as we're beyond that stage and we've finished growing, all of the damage that we can do to our tissues during the daytime get repaired through growth hormone release during sleep as well. So very important for that. Super important for our immune functions as well. We know that, for example, infections lead to an increase in deep sleep. So almost like a natural defense that our body is putting forward as we're entering like the flu season now, our sleep might be a strong ally to then fight with some of these infections. And we know that, for example, if we have insufficient sleep and we're getting some flu shots, we might get a reduction of at least half of the antibody response of vaccines, for example, compared to if we slept okay. So kind of another incentive to really protect our sleep, to protect our health, especially in this time of year. And there's some evidence as well showing that if we sleep deprive people again, and not even for a full night, like if we just restrict people's sleep to 4 or 5 hours, we induce a 70% reduction in those anti-cancer fighting immune cells. You might have heard of the killer cells. Those are very sensitive to our sleep as well. So of course, another strong ally to fight against cancer. And so it's not surprising to see that now the World Health Organization has classified short sleep as a significant risk for different types of cancer, including also dysregulation and the timing of sleep. So for example, people who do shift work, and some people adapt to shift work, but some people kind of carry an extra burden because their body can't get used to it. And that's where it starts getting a little bit dangerous for our health. Other aspects, sleep is very important for cardiovascular regulation. So during sleep, our heart rates and blood pressure do drop down. So it's an occasion for our system to reboot. We see a 300% risk of calcification of the arteries over a 5-year period in people who have poor sleep. So increasing some of the mechanisms that could lead to adverse cardiovascular health. And so increased risks of heart attack, stroke, just through that period where we're changing the daylight savings time, especially in the spring where we're losing an hour of sleep. We see a 24% increase in heart attack the following day. So this is kind of an unfortunate natural experiment where we're seeing the effects of sleep loss at the population level. I might skip a little bit. I'm quite excited about this sleep for brain health, because this is a fairly recent discovery where we found out that there's literally some brain cleaning that happens during our sleep. So during wake, we progressively accumulate certain neurotoxins that can damage the functioning of the brain. You might have heard of tau and beta amyloid plaques, which are linked, for example, to Alzheimer's disease, but everyone has that to some degree. And those kind of neurotoxins basically accumulate in the brain and slow down the transmission and the communication between brain cells during the day. So the more time we spend awake, the more we build up some of these neurotoxins. And what happens during sleep is that the space between brain cells actually expands, which enables the liquid within our brain to really kind of flush away the free radicals and their neurotoxins that we've accumulated during the night. And this especially is prominent during deep sleep. So that's where a lot of us now are thinking about ways of increasing deep sleep, especially as people are aging, to try to kind of protect brain health. Sleep is super important, as we were saying, for memory processes as well. What you're seeing here is results from a study where people were having to learn pairs of words, and you can see the performance after a normal night of sleep versus after a period of wake. So we can see that just by inducing sleep, we're boosting performance on memory tasks. And interestingly, we see the reverse phenomenon as well. So we were talking about those sleep spindles, those like little bouts of rapid activity that we see even in light sleep. And what we find is that, if we measure the spindles during, normal sleep after a normal day, we've got a certain level. But then after we learned something, if we've been like really actively involved in trying to memorize and cognitively, like our thinking skills have been active during the day, then what we see is an increase in the number of sleep spindles. So, the more, the quality of our sleep influences how we're able to perform in terms of our memory during the daytime, but also how active we are during the daytime is influencing the quality of our sleep as well. So there's really that bi-directional relationship. And this last one here at the bottom is quite interesting as well. What you see here is pictures of the brain that were done in a scanner like the one that we've got at the Royal. And basically this is showing the activity during sleep. And those regions that you see here are parts of the hippocampus, which is one of the brain regions that's super important for the hardwiring of memory traces within the brain. And what we see is that there's a reactivation of the same parts of the brain that were mobilized for learning during wakefulness that are kind of replayed while we're sleeping. So kind of showing the brain in action in terms of how those memory traces are getting actively consolidated by sleep process. Sleep is also very important for mental health, and we know now that there's this bi-directional relationship between sleep issues and low mood, irritability, the way that we appraise things. So we tend to have a negative bias when we're sleep deprived, to ruminate a bit more as well. And of course, when we're not feeling that great during the daytime, we tend to have more sleep problems as well. So there's this kind of vicious cycle that gets created between sleep and mental health. And one of the things that I think is important to keep in mind is that, as I'm hoping is clear by now, like our brain is not functioning in the same way during sleep than it is during wake. And we see that transitioning as well, even, in the evening before we start falling asleep. So, for example, just to highlight some of those structures here, you have the frontal part of the brain that is, tied to a lot of our rational thinking, how we're able to make sense out of things, to kind of de-escalate situations, to problem solve efficiently. And here you have the amygdala, which is at the core of the brain. And this is a region of the brain that's really important for, or really kind of activated and involved in our emotional regulations, and in how, when we're stressed out and things like that, it tends to fire up. So during the daytime, classically, we have the rational part of our brain, if you want, that kind of actively regulates and suppresses and kind of helps maintain the stress part of the brain in a healthier balance, so that we can, even if we're facing a stressful situation, we're able to rationalize it, to think about it, to find solutions. What happens in the nighttime is our kind of frontal part of the brain is starting to kind of wind down a little bit. And our emotional parts of the brain are becoming more and more active. And the two don't talk to each other as much as they would during the daytime. So it's the kind of perfect recipe to lay in bed and worry endlessly and kind of go through these problems in your head and not really kind of find any solutions. I don't know if that resonates with everyone, but those periods where, you're really kind of stressed about something and it goes on in your head. And then you wake up the next morning and you're like, that was really not an issue. Like, this was a simple thing. And I don't know why I was kind of so stuck on there. Well, of course, we're stuck because like the rational parts of your brain were not there to support your thinking. So, one thing I find is useful is to kind of keep that in mind and just, factor that in, so that's, pre-bedtime and nighttime is the worst time for most people to kind of problem shoot and solve and try to ruminate and think about issues. If we, of course, will get those thoughts about the stressful events that have happened during the day and things that are concerning us, but the best thing to do is to kind of put them on the bedside table and kind of acknowledge that they're there, and say that, you know, you'll address them tomorrow when your frontal lobe is ready and woken up to help support your thinking. So these are examples of how the brain is functioning as well when we're sleep deprived. And you can see if, for example, again, the kind of the emotional parts of the brain, which will kind of react to negative stimuli, for example, when after we had a normal night of sleep. And then what happens when we have poor night of sleep, they fire up much more intensely and they recruit more brain regions as well. And we see, interestingly, the same type of phenomenon when we're exposing people to positive emotional stimuli. So overall, the brain becomes kind of just more reactive to emotions when we're sleep deprived. So it's not surprising then to see that, you know, when we don't sleep well, we have reduced ability to cope with stress. We become more irritable, more prone to anger, more depressed, more anxious as well. And it kind of intensifies our emotional reactions overall. And this is just some results from a recent study that we've done in partnership with Mood Disorder Society of Canada in a representative sample of Canadians across the country, over 1,200 people. We found that 43% of people from the general population were reporting symptoms of different sleep disorders, which is quite alarming, but that number was doubled in those people who had a diagnosis of a mental disorder. So we're seeing really a strong association between difficulties in sleep and difficulties in mental health. And I don't want to sound super negative here. I think that the good news is that sleep is actually a strategic window on which we can intervene to protect mental health. So we know now through a lot of studies that, for example, in people with insomnia, if we don't even talk about their anxiety issues or their depression issues, we just treat the insomnia, then we see that the anxiety and the depression or the post-traumatic stress disorder, like a lot of these different mental challenges are getting alleviated because the person is sleeping better. And that kind of makes sense as well. Like if you're not sleeping well, it's much more difficult to then undergo psychotherapy or respond to standard treatments because you've got that extra challenge and the symptoms as well that come with it, with, you know, daytime fatigue and concentration issues and whatnot. So very quickly to start shifting gears towards how sleep changes across different periods of the life. What we have here is results from a large study in people who are 5 years of age all the way to 50 years of age. And you've got the number of time that is spent in different sleep stages. And you can see that stage 2 or light sleep stays fairly stable across the lifespan, but one of the things, and so does REM sleep as well, but one of the things that really changes drastically is that gray area that actually represents deep sleep. So this is normal that as we're aging, the quantity of deep sleep that we're getting gets a little bit kind of toned down. And we're seeing more wake after sleep onset, so more awakenings during the nighttime as well as we're aging, which is also normal. So as we're aging, even through LT aging, we see that it might take people a bit longer to fall asleep. We see a reduction in the time that is spent asleep. And we see that sleep becomes a bit more fragmented. So you can see those same types of figures that we've been seeing before in an early adults with some awakenings during the night, but more awakenings in a healthier individual. And those awakenings could last a little bit longer. That's where as well, like oftentimes as we're advancing and aging, we're seeing some return towards napping, which can be very healthy as well if we don't have massive sleep problems during the nighttime. Of course, there's the menopause factor that affects women as we're transitioning towards older age as well. So 40% of women during that period report sleep problems. You've heard or have experienced those hot flashes and night sweats. Insomnia is also on the rise, and also sleep disordered breathing. So you might have heard of that condition called sleep apnea, where people stop breathing repeatedly during sleep. And so this is something that also increases as we're aging, and especially during the menopause period. And of course, we've got the anxiety and the depression that can be tied to menopause that also interacts with sleep. So what can we do about, our sleep and our life habits that influence our sleep? Caffeine consumption, maybe not the sexiest way to start talking about that. And this is like my little story. I started in sleep research by working on the effects of caffeine. And I remember as a student coming back to my family and saying like, oh, hey, I found out that caffeine is actually not good for your sleep. And everyone was like, duh, like, of course. But I guess what a lot of people don't necessarily realize, because we often hear people say like, oh yeah, sure, I can have a coffee before sleep or in the afternoon. That's okay, like I still sleep. But it actually stays in your system for quite some time, like at least 8 hours. And then it changes some of the sleep architecture as well. So even if you are sleeping, it could reduce the amount of deep sleep that you're getting, increase the number of awakenings during the night, even if you don't remember it the next day. So overall, it kind of decreases sleep quality and quantity. So coffee in the morning if you need it, yes, but just being careful of coffee in the afternoon and of course in the evening. This one is maybe a little bit more subtle because a lot of people feel like smoking helps alleviate their stress, like it helps, kind of wind down maybe before bedtime. But what we tend to forget is that nicotine is a stimulant of the central nervous system. So although it makes us more relaxed, it also makes the brain more wired and awake. So what we see is that people take longer to fall asleep after smoking. There's more awakenings, there's a reduction in sleep time as well, and more perturbed sleep as well as we're stopping to smoke. So it becomes kind of difficult to get rid of it. Alcohol is another tricky one because we know that it actually makes it easier to fall asleep after we've had a couple of drinks. So some people are sometimes tempted to use alcohol to help with their sleep. But what we see is if you look at the sleep quality overall across the night, then we have much more fragmented sleep after drinking, even if we don't recall it the next day. And we're also more prone to sleep apnea. So these kind of respiratory arrests that we're getting during sleep, and it might not be to the level where it's a clinical case of a full diagnosis of sleep apnea, because we all have those kind of stops in breathing, but they're more frequent after we drink. So something to kind of keep in mind, because those are kind of invisible enemies of sleep that we might get if we drink and we might not realize it. Physical activity is a big one. We know that exercise, especially cardiovascular exercise, so anything that will get your heart pumping, does improve sleep and the biological clock as well. So we see better sleep quality, more ease to fall asleep as well and to stay asleep, and increased in deep sleep, which is very helpful, especially as we're aging as well. And one thing is also to kind of secure some time to get in the right mind space before sleep. If we can plan at least 1 hour or even 2 hours to wind down before going to bed, creating like a pre-sleep ritual, and that could look very different for different people. But kind of getting back to the good old books, something that's relaxing, that's peaceful, that you'll enjoy, just to kind of create some me space to buffer between, the busy kind of daytime to transitioning in the right mind space for sleep. And one thing I want to highlight as well is the light exposure. We can use light to our advantage because that biological clock that we kept talking about that regulates our sleep-wake cycle is exquisitely sensitive to the light around us. And we know that light in the morning will kind of suppress our sleepy hormone and get us ready to start with the day and have a lot of energy, whereas light in the evening will suppress our sleep hormone and could make it harder for us to fall asleep. So just being mindful of these patterns can be a helpful way to protect our sleep and to boost our energy levels during the daytime. But as we age, there's, these kind of natural sleep difficulties that could be normal, but we also see increases in sleep disorders like formal sleep pathologies. Here you see some examples of the prevalence of sleep apnea at the top, and insomnia, as well as restless leg syndrome, so another type of sleep disorder across age group. And we see these kind of increases in those rates as we're aging. So I guess I'm highlighting that because we often talk about those kind of sleep tips for better sleep health, but for some people it's not enough, right? So there's signs that it might be time to consult a sleep specialist if you're having persisting difficulties to fall asleep or to stay asleep that really impacts your ability to function during the day. If you're feeling especially sleepy during the daytime, even if you feel like you've slept enough, for example, that could be a sign of sleep apnea, which you wouldn't realize that you're stopping breathing, but this is kind of altering the quality of your sleep. Of course, if you're being told that you stop breathing during your sleep, this is kind of a sign that it might be important to get checked. And if you're experiencing some discomfort in your legs during the evening, if you're experiencing regular nightmares, so those are all kind of signs that we might need professional help. And I've put kind of here a classical example of the GP's office, which we often end up talking about our sleep problems in, but also kind of a psychology setting, because if we look at currently the most prevalent sleep disorder in Canada is insomnia, and the recommended first-line treatment for insomnia is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. We call it CBTI for short, and this is typically delivered by psychologists. So just to give you an example of how insomnia kind of develops. So we all have different predisposing factors for insomnia problems. Just the fact of being older, for example, will raise that bar, increasing our risks of having insomnia. But then there's a precipitating factor. There's a stressor, for example, the pandemic, which kind of raises sleep issues across the threshold. And then there's perpetuating factors that maintains our sleep problems beyond the fact that this stressor has resolved. So basically, we can't change our predisposing factors, which could be age or a genetic predisposition. We can't isolate ourselves so that we're not exposed to any stressors in our lives, but we can change some of those perpetuating factors. So this is essentially what we'll be kind of tackling when we're using cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. We'll install some personalized sleep manipulations that will kind of progressively change the way that we think and behave around sleep. And I'll stop there. Just a shameful plug. If you are having sleep issues and you'd like to be involved in sleep research, we have currently a study through which we're delivering cognitive behavioral therapy for free. We're also offering home-based sleep assessments with these little headbands that you can use to measure your brain waves at home. And so if you're interested, if you're 60 plus, if you're living in Ontario or Quebec and having sleep difficulties, please do reach out. And I'll stop there. Sorry, I ran a bit over time, but I'll see if I can tackle some of your questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Robillard. And I know you touched on a lot of the questions that are in the question box, so I'll try and combine them because there's some questions. So the first question that there was quite a bit of interest in is, you mentioned naps, and 50% of older adults nap. So is it good? Is it bad? Is it half an hour? Does it count in your total sleep? Maybe a little more information on naps.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I'll maybe get back to that sleep pressure process that we were talking about. So I love that question, because if you remember, like, we were building our sleep pressure progressively as the day advanced. So if we're having a nap very late in the day when we've built up a lot of sleep pressure, then we'll start dissipating that sleep pressure very rapidly, as we're seeing. And then this might interfere with our ability to fall asleep when the nighttime comes and to stay asleep. So what we often recommend is, if you can do your naps like earlier during the day period, then you have more time to leverage your sleep pressure mechanism. And this is then likely to have lower influence on how you're going to be able to fall asleep when the evening comes. So, as we were saying, like, naps are healthy. They're good ways to kind of boost our sleep, especially to counteract some of the effects of aging, as long as we don't have, full-blown insomnia. So if we have major sleep issues and it's very difficult for us to kind of fall asleep in the evening or to kind of stay asleep at night, it might be fueled by naps if we're napping during the daytime, because we're kind of messing up with that sleep pressure. So it might be difficult at first, but one of the things that we'll be doing through, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy is also kind of consolidate the wake period and the sleep period so that our sleep becomes more, of better quality and more condensed.
Great, thanks. There's some questions about the use of apps, whether it be a Fitbit, yeah, or Apple Watch or any other watch. Like, what should you use them? One. Secondly, what are the key things we should look at? Because there's a sleep gauge, there's total sleep, there's quality of sleep. Like, what's the one thing we should focus on?
Yeah, another excellent question. And I'm quite passionate about this because I feel like there's a lot of these kind of tools and gizmos, and this is exciting because this is bringing attention to sleep, but at the same time, it is a bit dangerous because like a lot of these devices are not necessarily to the standard of what we would love to see in research. So I guess and you've probably experienced that as well. Like some people see as well that their subjective sense of how they slept is sometimes not aligning with some of those tools. And we keep in mind that these tools are measuring what they're measuring, right? We spent a lot of time today talking about the basics of sleep measurements, which are based on brain activity. So, sleep is essentially your brain functioning on the different state. How does a watch kind of actually measure that is, one of the questions you might ask. So through kind of inferences, we're seeing like, okay, if the person is not moving that much, if sometimes if heart rate is kind of more, stable and lower, then it might be a sign that they're asleep. But of course, this is very indirect, right? So this is not as precise as, for example, what you're seeing here, which is, one of those new gizmos as well, but is actually measuring like the brain state. So yeah, basically we've been using those kind of activity movements for decades in research, but of course we've got like research grade devices. So I'm always taking with a grain of salt what we get for with the more commercial based devices. And I would say like if we're looking at, for example, things like the sleep duration. Okay, I believe it to some degree. If we're talking about deep sleep, REM sleep, and these types of things, which, as we've seen, are characterized by like the patterns of, those brain waves, then I feel like this is crossing the line too much. Like this is, we need kind of more direct measurements for that. So as you were saying, like it depends what types of metrics they're kind of proposing, and those types of apps that you just put on your phone and you leave your phone next to your pillow. This is like another step of like way too indirect types of measures.
Great, thanks. We've got so many questions. I'm still trying to group them. So my apologies if I don't get to every question. There was another series of questions around menopause. Hints for sleep during menopause, surviving hot sweats, anything on HRT or supplements to help in that domain.
Yeah, and I guess we can get back to, I think I've got a little slide on this as well. We can get back to some of the tips that we've discussed as well. There's some evidence that estrogen replacement therapy can be helpful. Even sometimes low doses of antidepressant can help as well. Phytoestrogens from soy products. There are some studies to indicate that melatonin, so that's which we can get at the pharmacy, can be helpful as well with low doses. And of course, trying to, as we've gone through, this is kind of especially tricky because as we are falling asleep and to be able to get good quality sleep, we need that drop in temperature, which of course menopause completely wrecks, right? So being careful about that and, really keeping like lightweight pajamas, beddings that are used with cotton and natural fibers to really try to stay cool and kind of lower the temperature in the bedroom are important. And physical activity as well, like staying active can be very helpful. But I think that we need to do more, and especially in research, like women are complicated. There's this long history of following men because, we don't have to worry about the menstrual cycle and menopause and all of these things, but this is a real life problem that deserves more attention.
Great, thanks. There's also some questions, and I know you can't give medical advice because that's not the intention, but there's some questions about, melatonin dosage, THC, and effexor. Like is there any general comments you could make on those for helping sleep, or is that really more of medical advice?
Well, the melatonin front, and just to kind of nuance what I was saying, there's still kind of a couple of problems in the sense this is understudied first, so there's not a ton of evidence. And the reality is that, a lot of the studies more about medications and sleep medications are driven by pharmaceutical companies, which, kind of fund those studies. So nobody really is keen to fund melatonin or natural products studies. So we unfortunately know too little. So there's little evidence for things like, for example, for general insomnia. So, we can't support the use of melatonin for insomnia treatment. However, in certain cases where for example, the biological clock is a strong component driving the sleep problems, their melatonin might be more of use. And one way to differentiate that could be, for example, if you're having sleep issues like on a regular basis because you're trying to kind of stay awake to be able to share some time with family in the evening, but otherwise like you go to bed like at 4 p.m. if you were listening to your body, or the opposite, if you're really struggling to wake up in the morning and you're waking up, you're curtailing your sleep because you have to wake up to do your activities during the daytime, this might be a sign that it's not just pure insomnia, that it could be kind of a deregulation of the biological clock, and then playing with melatonin could be helpful. But yeah, ultimately, talking about these things with your doctor or care provider is the way to go.
Yeah, because I know magnesium gluconate was also mentioned in one of the questions, but that would be the same thing. We should talk to our healthcare professional.
Yeah.
Okay, great. This is the famous one. Partner snoring keeps me up. What can I do?
Oh, yeah. And first of all, snoring has a strong connection as well with sleep apnea. And I keep talking about that because this is really like an invisible disease in the sense that people might not notice that they have this condition, and then it can have a lot of adverse health effects. So one thing that comes to mind at the first is encouraging your partner to go and get tested for sleep apnea. And if that's the case, then they might be put on, treatment that will resume, lower down also the snoring. So benefits for partner and benefits for you as well. But at the end of the day, also if sleep apnea is not the issue, and if the person keeps on snoring, it's kind of hard to say. But like I feel like a lot of people actually benefit from having like separate rooms as well. Or I think sleep is. I hope I convince you of the importance of sleep. So it's important to protect if that there's ways to kind of or using earplugs or things like that. But we have to be conscious, and that's oftentimes some things that we hear about from women complaining about the husband snoring, though it can be totally both ways. And then kind of so then I worry about the partner's quality of sleep if they just do nothing and feel like they have to stay in the bedroom to sleep. But then as well, I'm hearing the other side of the story of, oh well, I just kick him like a couple of times and then he stops snoring, so I'm fine. But then you're actually kind of causing micro arousal for your partner, so disrupting their sleep even if they don't kind of fully awaken. So like sometimes it might actually be beneficial to consider split rooms.
So, okay, one quick question. You've mentioned several times about getting tested for sleep apnea. How do somebody do that? Then I'll give you two quick questions and we'll have to close. Okay.
So we need to get like a referral from a GP to then get sent to a sleep clinic. So currently and I won't elaborate too much because we're short on time, but this involves like coming for an overnight sleep study in a sleep lab. We're working currently at the Royal on new technologies that could help screening at home as well for seniors, also for youth. So for people whom it's not always easy to come to a sleep lab, and of course there's some waitlist issues, but for sleep apnea, there's no route around this. There's questionnaires and interviews that exist, but we need to measure respiration patterns during sleep to be able to find it.
Okay, and the last two questions may or may not be linked. One, we've had several questions about people waking up at 3 or 4 in the morning and can't get back to sleep. Any hints? And the other one is linked to people with leg cramps that wake them up in the night, or leg issues.
Yeah, yeah. So the leg cramps could be a sign of restless leg syndrome. So that's a sleep disorder that is also under-recognized often, or there's also a periodic leg movement disorder. So these kind of sleep disorders would again be diagnosed by a sleep physician. So going and consulting is a good idea, because there are some treatments for this that could be prescribed by your doctor. And that could really improve the quality of sleep. For the nocturnal awakenings, if we're seeing that like repeatedly over time, like say at least 3 nights a week for a sustained period of time for several months, then this is a sign that we are struggling with insomnia. And again, like the recommended first-line treatment for this would be cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So do reach out to us. Also, on our website, we have more information about where to find that treatment.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Riordan, and my apologies to everyone because it's very difficult to get all your questions in. We had over 30 questions for you, so maybe we'll have to bring you back again, Dr. Robillard, to answer some of those questions. I know I learned a lot today, and now I have to integrate it also to help my own sleep. But thank you so much. And to all our members, there were several questions about they wanted to rewatch this. So yes, we will be sending out an email with the recording included, as well as more information from Dr. Robillard about some studies she's doing. And also, we'll give you some information about our mega recruitment drive. And before you go, I also want to invite everyone to our in-person event, if you're in Ottawa, on October 29th, entitled Thrive in Retirement, Put Your Skills and Abilities to Great Use. The registration link should be in the chat, I think, Antoine. But if not, it's on our website. And what it entails is there's going to be a panel of federal retirees who'll share their experiences and insights about working after retirement, whether inside or outside of government, through a contractor, an agency, or as a volunteer. One of our lead panelists you'll recognize is former clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Warnick. And the event is free, parking's free, and as always, there'll be snacks and coffee, courtesy of our sponsor, LOR Staffing. So hopefully we'll see you on the 9th. And once again, thank you everyone for attending, and Dr. Robillard for your wonderful insights. Have a good day, all.